And welcome everybody to First Saturday. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation hosted by First Saturday PDX. Now in its 20th season, First Saturday PDX is a monthly continuing education series covering a wide range of Chinese history, culture, and art-related topics. All of our programs are free and open to the public. The title of today's talk is Myriad Treasures, celebrating the renovation and reinstallation of the Soreng Gallery of Chinese Art. And today's speaker is Anne Rose Kitagawa, Chief Curator of the Collections and Asian Art Galleries and the Director of Academic Programs at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art at University of Oregon. We're so glad to have her here today.
Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure to share my screen with you. So first of all, I'd very much like to thank the First Saturday PDX team for inviting me to come and speak with you and for their very kind technical support for this talk. It's a great pleasure to have a chance to communicate with other art lovers, and my only sadness is that we're doing so virtually and not in person in the museum. But I hope that in the future you'll have the chance to come and I'll have a chance to take you through and give you an in-person tour when it's safe to do so. So let me move ahead. So the Betty and John Soreng Gallery of Chinese Art at the University of Oregon's Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art has recently undergone a long-awaited renovation. Generous donors provided support to enhance the space to better align with the high quality of our collection. Myriad Treasures, the inaugural installation in the newly refurbished gallery, features 113 objects spanning 4 millennia of Chinese history from the museum's legacy collection, along with some exciting recent acquisitions. The works include Neolithic to 19th century ceramics, ancient and archaistic bronze vessels, Buddhist art, literati and professional paintings and prints, examples from the museum's superlative collection of Chinese textiles, calligraphy, decorative art, and a few modern and contemporary paintings, posters, and photographs. The University of Oregon Museum of Art, as the JSMA was originally called, was founded through the efforts of Asian art collector Gertrude Bass Warner, 1863 through 1951. Gertrude Bass was born into a prominent Chicago family and educated in France and at Vassar College, where she studied art and became an accomplished amateur photographer. In 1904, a decade after divorcing her first husband, she traveled to Asia to visit her brother, who was then a journalist covering the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 through 1905. In China, she met Major Murray Warner, an MIT-trained engineer employed by the American Trading Company. The couple soon married and established a house in Shanghai and a houseboat on the Yangtze River. The Warners were stimulated by their surroundings and traveled widely to learn about various Asian artistic, literary, cultural, and religious traditions. Mrs. Warner documented their adventures by collecting professional photographs, which she supplemented with pictures of her own. She also began to amass a collection of Chinese, Japanese, and later Korean works of remarkable quality, depth, and complexity, focusing on well-established artistic categories, but delving deeper when particular themes piqued her interest. For example, she became fascinated with silk and sericulture, which stimulated her to collect over 450 Chinese garments and hangings, representing many styles and techniques, and to photograph many steps in the silk production process, and even to experiment with cultivating silkworms in her own house. So those are pictures of her silkworms. Living in China, she learned to appreciate native art forms, not just those created for export. She also became acquainted with and collected works by a variety of expatriate Western artists, such as Helen Hyde, Elizabeth Keith, and Bertha Lum, people who traveled to Asia in search of exotic inspiration. In 1909, the Warners relocated to San Francisco, and after Murray Warner died in 1920, Gertrude Bass Warner moved to Eugene, Oregon, where her son Samuel Bass Warner was a professor of law in the law school at the University of Oregon. She began negotiating with the university president, Prince Lucian Campbell. And in 1922, when he agreed to raise funds to build an academic art museum, Mrs. Warner donated more than 3,700 Asian objects to the state of Oregon in her husband's memory to establish the University of Oregon Museum of Art. This image shows a selection of those works on display in Gerlinger Hall before the museum was built. Warner then devoted the next 30 years to fundraising. This is an image of people seated where the museum is now during a fundraiser, building or planning, designing the museum. This is the original drawing for it, and actually it doesn't look like that, as we'll discuss, and ultimately building that museum. While also expanding the Murray Warner collection and serving as its founding director. With these objectives in mind, she traversed the globe visiting museums and consulting with experts in order to create a world-class institution demonstrating the highest standards of exhibition and preservation. One result of her labors was a heightened awareness of potential damage caused by light exposure and fluctuating climate. To avoid these pitfalls, Warner asked architect Ellis F. Lawrence to design a fireproof, windowless, artificially ventilated building made of concrete, clad in brick. As a Christian Scientist, Gertrude Bass Warner aspired to promote cross-cultural understanding with the goal of achieving world peace. Deeply distressed by the cruelties of war she witnessed during her travels, she became a committed peace activist. Her museum's mission stated its ambition to, quote, illustrate the customs, costumes, and manners of the Chinese and Japanese people, their literature, philosophy, religion, arts, and crafts, for the purpose of aiding as far as possible the prevention of war, end quote. While Gertrude Bass Warner was a respectful admirer of, quote unquote, the Orient, decades before the thoughtful critique of that concept by Edward Said, she held progressive views on a variety of subjects. For example, she was disappointed with the social disparities she observed in China, where she and her husband often rode in third-class coaches rather than the first-class transportation reserved for wealthy foreigners. She had no patience for collectors who craved exotic art, but had no curiosity about the people who produced it. She was concerned that UO students were inattentive to foreigners with whom they came in contact, and aspired to teach them, quote, understanding of the brotherhood of man, all children of one father. In addition to her work at the museum, Warner amassed a collection of more than 5,000 glass lantern slides of Chinese and Japanese subjects, and purchased Asian books for the library, provided support for the nascent Asian Studies program, and gave grants for American students to go to Asia and for Asian students to come to UO. So this is just a small selection of the huge group of hand-colored glass lantern slides now in special collections at the University of Oregon. When the University of Oregon Museum of Art opened to the public in 1933, it focused almost exclusively on Asian art. Its restrained brick facade bore biblical quotations from Proverbs and Psalms, along with inscriptions representing the parallel wisdoms of Asia and the West. So I put little rectangles where the inscriptions are. So on the left, above the north alcove, is a quotation from Lao Tzu reading, "To know the harmonious is called the eternal. To know the eternal is called enlightenment." The parallel inscription on the right, chiseled above the south alcove, is from Plato. "Beauty absolute, separate, simple, and everlasting, imparted to the ever-growing and perishing beauties of all other things." The new museum featured well-appointed small and medium-sized Japanese and Korean galleries, flanking a grandiose central hall filled with Chinese treasures and anchored at either end by an ornately decorated throne and inside an enormous glass display case, by which I mean there were 2 thrones at either end of this gallery. You can see one at the back. Dubbed the Throne Room, the Chinese gallery was specifically designed to accommodate Gertrude Bass Warner's largest Chinese textiles, which included, as you see on the left, a 10-foot tall, 13-foot wide imperial bed curtain, seen there, And in the next slide, in the center, a 15-foot-tall kusa, or tapestry weave, hanging of the Queen Mother of the West with Taoist immortals, and on either side, a pair of 13-foot gold-wrapped silk carpets. Please note that these works are all too large to be covered by a single sheet of glass, and thus they were covered by 3, or in some cases 6, panes of glass, and the cases were so heavy that they required support beneath, those little feet. For over 80 years, the Warner Collection has provided ample inspiration and research opportunities for generations of University of Oregon staff, students, faculty, scholars, and museum visitors. Likewise, Mrs. Warner's idealism and generosity of spirit have inspired subsequent benefactors, such as Portland philanthropist Jordan Schnitzer, in whose honor the museum was renamed after its 2002 through 2005 expansion, and also Betty Soreng, who endowed the Chinese Gallery with her husband in the early 2000s and provided additional support for its recent renovation. Over time, minor modifications have been made to the Chinese Gallery. I'll show you a couple of them. Here you see an iteration from circa 1990, which still includes the enormous terrarium-like displays of the thrones at the far ends of the galleries. And here is the way that it looked in 2005 after the renovation, with a single throne on a platform in the center of the gallery, no longer encased in glass. So instead, on the platform with stanchions, it was deemed to be far enough out of reach that people could look at it in the open air. Despite the various minor modifications, this gallery's imposing size precluded a major overhaul. The cumulative damage of 80-plus years of successive installations rendered the plaster walls increasingly difficult to work with. The only illumination, which you can kind of intuit from the slide at the right, is provided by lights mounted in a coved glass coffered ceiling 25 feet above the gallery floor, which allowed no flexibility in terms of angle or placement. The carpet was worn out and in need of replacement. In addition, the scale of the largest Chinese textiles and the combined size and darkened state of many of the Chinese paintings presented significant display challenges. This is because standard size sheets of acrylic are too small to cover such large works. And they also create distracting reflections over old, dark paintings. And the non-glare plexiglass is prohibitively expensive, i.e. around $4,500 per sheet, so just beyond the means of the museum. So for this reason, a number of the museum's most important Chinese objects were deemed too large or difficult to safely and attractively display. Nevertheless, in 2018, the decision was made to renovate the Soreng Gallery. After a successful fundraising campaign, the respective floor, wall, light, and casework modifications were implemented. Here you see the space during the process of renovation. So they've already painted the lower part of the walls, covered the floors, and a lot of the stuff is just kind of moved aside as other furniture needed to be built. So a dark gray color scheme was chosen and coordinating carpet was installed. We chose a dark color, again, because a number of the works of art themselves can be quite dark. And if you put a dark painting against a light colored wall, it looks dirty. So this is a nice way to let the things kind of shine. The gallery walls were repainted, and 5 sturdy 12-foot feature walls were added at focal points. So here you can see at the left there's a corner wall that's 12 feet tall and 13 feet wide that abuts another one that's 12 feet tall and 21 feet wide. So that's one of the walls that I'm talking about, which created a total of 860 square feet of flexible, user-friendly display space. You might wonder why you would need to do that. The original gallery walls were made of traditional horsehair plaster, and there are only so many times you can drill into those walls before it just stops being a supportive structure for the works of art that you want to hang on it. New track lighting was suspended 10 feet below the coffered ceiling, affording easier access and greater aesthetic control. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of the renovation was the installation of 2 large state-of-the-art display cases with integrated LED lights and non-reflective glass that can graciously accommodate all of the museum's largest Chinese paintings, most of the large textiles, or a selection of 3-dimensional objects on pedestals and shelves. People in the museum were aghast of why would we want to get these sort of Metropolitan Museum of Art quite costly fixtures, but once they saw them installed, they understood. After the renovation was completed, Myriad Treasures was installed in the newly refurbished gallery. The exhibition opened to the public in February of 2020, but of course closed 1 month later due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Barred from entering the building, museum staff transitioned to producing original exhibition-related digital content in order to address the changing curricular needs of faculty and students. And here, if you will indulge me, I'm going to switch to sharing one of those videos that we produced. This is the one about the gallery, and I'm somewhat embarrassed because you get to hear me again doing the voiceover. So it will sound very familiar, but at least you'll get to see the space in real time. So let's share that. And go. The Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art's Soreng Gallery of Chinese Art has just undergone a long-awaited renovation. Betty Soreng and other generous donors allowed us to update our facilities to a standard better in line with the high quality of our collection. The inaugural installation, Myriad Treasures, features Chinese artworks spanning 4 millennia of history from the legacy collection of museum founder Gertrude Bess Warner and from exciting recent acquisitions. The works include Neolithic through 19th century ceramics, ancient and archaistic bronze vessels, Buddhist art, literati and professional paintings and prints, samples from our superlative collection of Qing Dynasty textiles, imperial calligraphy, elegant decorative objects made of jade, glass, and crystal, and selected modern and contemporary Chinese works. This reinstallation celebrates the last century of cross-cultural engagement at the University of Oregon and heralds exciting future faculty and student research on the JSMA's enduring and expanding Chinese art collection. All right, so I will go back to my PowerPoint. All right. I'm happy to report that the exhibition opened again today. Sorry. Let me get the audio on my computer to stop doing that. There we go. Sorry. And back. Screen share. Sorry about that. Okay. So I'm happy to report that the exhibition reopened today. I will go there as soon as I finish this PowerPoint. We are now open for in-person visits, and that is with social distancing and time tickets. So if you manage to come to Eugene, please make an appointment to come and see the galleries. Everyone will be masked. There's lots of hand sanitizer. They're spacing between people. They're only letting a certain number of people in at a time. And hopefully you can enjoy the art that you're seeing virtually now. So our inaugural exhibition, Myriad Treasures, showcases a number of extraordinary works from Gertrude Bess Warner's legacy collection, such as, let's see, such as the stately framed calligraphy, reading "Honesty and Diligence Enrich the Country," written by Emperor Yongzheng. It also features Qing Dynasty textiles with exquisite kosa embroidered and or couched decoration. These include 4 Chinese and Manchu court robes, these 3, fabulous robes, and the spectacular Manchu woman's formal court vest with collar that was on the cover of John Vollmer's Decoding Dragons catalog. There was actually a catalog produced in the 1980s by a very distinguished scholar, John Vollmer, of our collection. It doesn't have the best production values. They're not fully illustrated, and many of those in black and white, but this was deemed special enough to be on the cover. Let's see. Probably my favorite pieces in the gallery are these fabulous double-sided embroidered military banners with snarling winged tigers. I believe I put a detail in here because you see the overall pattern, but when you get in close, you can see that the embroiderers took such care that it's actually variegated fur. It's not all one color. They're so beautiful. We also have non-official robes, such as these 2, with theatrical and floral decoration. The robe on the left has theatrical scenes, and this is done in kosa, or tapestry weave. So the figures that you see in that sort of leaf shape are not embroidered. It was actually woven with the different colors, with a little bit of painted enhancement. It's really a tour de force robe. We also have a wonderful dark blue robe with auspicious designs of 100 children. And again, I couldn't help myself because the details of this are so charming. So in this case, not kosa, but embroidery. And you can see that even within the rather restrictive vocabulary of stitches, the artists are able to impart such lifelike character to each of these figures, and they really do seem to interact in charming ways. In addition to the robes, we also have a lovely hanging, also with the auspicious design of 100 children. This not only embroidered, but also couched. So you can see the outlines of those blue and green rocks and some details on the figures. It's not just in color, but it's gold that has been wrapped around threads and then tacked down to the surface, outlining some of the forms. And because we had this theme of auspicious children, it was kind of fun to show how these themes resonate throughout centuries. So in addition to traditional works, we have even more contemporary, kind of kitschy New Year's images of happy children. I had spoken earlier about Gertrude Bass Warner's passion for silk and sericulture, and some of the ways in which this has been manifested is not just in the collecting of textiles, but also objects that talk about textile production. So this is one of a series of 12 export paintings showing the production of silk. Likewise, we have 2 pages out from a major book, imperially composed pictures of tilling and weaving. These and other Chinese textiles from the Warner collection have been a focus of research for UO history professor Ina Asim, who's actually here with us, and I believe will be at the tea as well if you have any special textile questions. She collaborates with me and the museum on many curricular projects, most recently including this ambitious digital exhibition she did about Gertrude Bass Warner's Artful Fabric of Collecting, which is just a wonderful resource filled with all sorts of technical information about textiles and historic information about Gertrude Bass Warner and her travels in Asia. This was a project funded through a grant from the Mellon Foundation, and that address will take you to it. So I hope you get a chance to see it. So Gertrude Bass Warner's collection also contains a number of noteworthy Chinese paintings. First and foremost among these is this fabulous medicine Buddha painting. And thanks to the elegant new non-glare cases, visitors can actually see the paintings, which was very difficult to do under shiny plexiglass in the past. So there are no distracting reflections. Every detail of this painting is meticulously executed with the highest quality materials. So this is a Ming Dynasty painting. It's inscribed, and it also has Qianlong seals on it, showing that it was part of an imperial inventory. It's just, I often joke with people, this is the best Chinese painting that we have in the museum. Turns out it's the Chinese Buddhist painting that we have in the museum. It's also the only Chinese Buddhist painting that we have in the museum, but it's actually one of the best Chinese Buddhist paintings in the country. So it's wonderful to have one and to have it be this. We also have on view this beautiful monumental painting of cranes and pines, two longevity images. And when Gertrude Bess Warner acquired this, she acquired it with the thought that it was a Song Dynasty painting. So the bad news is it's not Song. The good news is it's Ming, and this type of just school painting from the Ming Dynasty has become a real focus of interest for scholars, and this is one of the best examples. Likewise, there are monumental paintings on the left, Yuan or perhaps early Ming painting of the return of Taoyuan Ming. So after a series of unsatisfactory official positions, when he decides to go back to his estate in the country, and here he is being welcomed by his servants and going back to this kind of bucolic place where he can tend to his garden. On the right, heretofore unpublished painting by Lan Ying, which is truly monumental, just a fabulous, amazing painting that a scholar had come to see and gotten very excited about. So this was our first chance to put it out because it was too big to put under regular size plex. We also have a couple of diminutive paintings out, including one of the series of 24 Paragons of Filial Piety. And again, Professor Asim had done an exhibition with us about filial piety, and this shows Wu Meng, so the filial child who, in order to keep his parents from being disturbed by mosquitoes, would surreptitiously sneak in, take off his shirt, and let the mosquitoes bite him at night instead of sucking on his parents' blood. And one morning, I guess, his father awoke to realize, oh, my son is such a filial child. So you get to see that in this lovely painting. So this is a diminutive album leaf, probably about the size of what you're seeing on your own computer screen today. So the nuanced illumination afforded by the lower light tracks in the galleries actually amplifies your appreciation of these subtle two-dimensional works. So in addition to Chinese textiles and paintings, Gertrude Bess Warner took pains to acquire a variety of appealing decorative objects, 57 of which are currently contextualized in the striking treasure wall that was crafted here in the state of Oregon using relatively inexpensive materials to emulate similar types of cabinets at the Chinese court. So this display features bronzes, jades, crystals, glass, ceramics, all sorts of objects from various periods. And I'm not going to show you all of them, but there's a range in date from the Zhou Dynasty through the early 20th century. I'm just going to give you one representative piece. So this Pilgrim flask with auspicious designs was created at the time when red glass was a new innovation and so exciting. So it was developed in the West, and Emperor Qianlong became obsessed with it. So I think we have 9 pieces of Qianlong period Qing Dynasty red glass in the case. Ceramics are installed throughout the gallery, and including this, the earliest piece in the collection of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, a Neolithic period Majayao culture piece dating to the 3rd millennium BCE. To Tong Dynasty tomb figurines, these Mingqi of the type called Zhenmushou, paired animal-headed and human-headed guardian figures in the so-called 3-color glaze, intended to protect the occupant of a tomb, and more recently acquired brown and black glaze ceramics of the Song and Jing dynasties. Just beautiful pieces that came from a collection in California, who are just in the process of sending us some lighter glazed wares. So we will feature those in the future. We also have out one of a pair of large globular overglaze enamel vases that have birds in plums, and they're such elegant court pieces. Gertrude S. Warner had amazing access to works of art because she was in China at the end of the Qing Dynasty when there wasn't the same sort of cachet for this court material. And so she loved that material, respected the culture, and wanted to show people in the West the great sophistication and wisdom that she perceived in Asia. Another thing that I should credit Professor Asim with is a display that we have of Chinese bronzes of all ages. I think as an art historian, my tendency would be to put the actual early bronzes together and then the later things that were done in emulation of early bronzes in a separate case. And in the past, when Professor Asim was planning a Foodways conference, we planned a display in which, just for reasons of organization, we ended up putting them all in one case, which I was very concerned about. But as she very rightly pointed out, there is no confusion. There are labels. You can see what the dates are. And from her standpoint, as an academician, the exciting part is actually the continuity, the fact that you have works of art that are separated by 2 and almost 3 millennia that are sharing these forms. And actually, one of the principal joys in our treasure wall are there are so many later jades, ceramics, works made of crystal and glass that also emulate the earlier forms because of that fascination with the past and, you know, kind of showing authority through those references to the past. We also have some sculptures out in the museum, including this very large seated Maitreya Buddha. And this, which at first glance might look like an old sculpture, a fragmentary sculpture, but this is of course a contemporary work made by a Taiwanese artist, Chen Longbing, called Sotheby's Buddha. And you might wonder why. Well, it looks like it's made of wood, but in fact, if you look at the back of it, you realize that it is a pile of auction catalogs that have been crafted on the other side. And I guess if we get closer, perhaps you can see the Sotheby's and Christie's. So it's kind of a critique. It's a very interesting work of art, and it's kind of fun to have it near a traditional Buddhist sculpture so viewers can compare and consider their respective meanings and what this artist in particular might be saying. In 1957, the museum received a 9-foot-tall Jade Pagoda from Winston Guest, who was an international polo player. Adorned with diminutive Buddhist sculptures and bronze architectural fittings, this fine example of 18th century imperial craftsmanship caused quite a stir when the donor acquired it in New York only a few months earlier. Now a cherished icon of the museum, it can be viewed in the round in the current installation. This is a detail of one of the Buddhist figures made of jade in the bottom row. The rest of them are made of other materials, but it is put together like an actual building. So it is a huge jigsaw puzzle and just an astonishing tour de force. There's also a splendid jade Taoist longevity mountain with intricate figures on both sides. So, given her period of activity and collecting priorities, it's not surprising to note that the strength of Mrs. Warner's collection is concentrated in the late imperial period, before the fall of the Qing Dynasty. Happily, the solid foundation she established has been enhanced by 2 recent major donations and a few strategic loans that address UO teaching priorities and extend the museum's narrative to the present. So the first of these is a group of 55 innovative mixed media works by a Chinese-born American artist, Hong Liu. Here you see her. During the Cultural Revolution, she was sent to the countryside for re-education. Later, she worked as a propaganda artist and art instructor. After immigrating to the US in the 1980s, she modified her former socialist realist style and broadened her subject matter to include imagery based on historical photographs. Liu collaborated with master printer David Salgado to combine aspects of painting and printmaking into a new hybrid medium, creating compelling gestural meditations on history and social justice, layered with luminous color. Two of those works are currently on view in the Myriad Treasures exhibition. The first, this one, entitled Imperial Column, juxtaposes a man, this is from a historical photograph, embracing a massive pillar in the Forbidden City, with apsaras, or angelic Buddhist figures, and scattered flower petals derived from 6th through 8th century paintings in the cave temple grottos at Dunhuang. The second of these paintings, which is devastating, commemorates the women forced into sexual servitude by Japanese soldiers during the Second Sino-Japanese War. It hangs beside a monumental propaganda poster of Mao Zedong. We're actually currently planning a Hongliu exhibition that's scheduled to open at our museum in May. So with luck, by then, perhaps people can come and visit. It will be an amazing show. So the second major Chinese acquisition featured in Myriad Treasures is a generous donation from Jack and Susie Wadsworth of 189 important contemporary Chinese photographs that will be the subject of a future special exhibition. 5 small works from this group are featured in the current installation, including the infamous dialogue shooting by Xiaolu. So this riveting photograph documents the artist firing bullets into her own art installation during the opening of the China Avant-Garde exhibition in Beijing on the 5th of February in 1989. Xiao's defiant act rocked the Chinese art world and resulted in her immediate arrest and the temporary closure of the entire exhibition. But when violence escalated a few months later at Tiananmen Square, she was lauded as a hero of democracy. The second group of works from the Wadsworth collection currently on view are 4 haunting photographs from the 15-leaf portfolio Here or There by artists Lin Tianmao and Wang Gongxin. In them, a series of mysterious women clad in diaphanous white cloth, or in some cases braided hair, inhabit otherworldly landscapes. The renovation of the George Schnitzer Museum of Art's Soreng Gallery of Chinese Art and the celebratory Myriad Treasures exhibition commemorate a century of cross-cultural engagement and herald exciting future developments, including the 2 forthcoming contemporary Chinese exhibitions I mentioned, as well as a promised gift that will support the long-term care of the Werner collection. Since its founding, the museum's holdings have expanded from 3,700 to almost 16,000 objects, and now represent not just traditional works from East Asia, but ancient through contemporary art from all over the world, more than half created by and for people of color. The JSMA supports UO's curriculum and provides rich opportunities for object-based learning at every level. Students are involved in many facets of the museum's day-to-day operation, gaining valuable work and educational experience. Last year, despite the pandemic, by which I mean last academic year, the museum experienced its highest rate of academic use, with over 10,200 students from 323 classes across 55 academic departments attending class in the museum or making use of our remote teaching resources. Each year, 45 to 50 students work in various capacities under the mentorship of JSMA staff, who model and encourage the type of inquiry, collaboration, and cultural awareness students will need to become well-informed global citizens. All of these activities perpetuate the ideals espoused by Gertrude Bass Warner to teach, quote, the love of the good and the love for the beautiful, the understanding of which makes the whole world kin. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very engaging tour of the gallery. We're going to transition into our Q&A.
Terrific.
Let's see. So as a reminder, if anyone has questions, there's a little Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can click that open and type in your questions. I'm gonna, let's see. All right, I'm gonna start with a quick one here. The first one is, what is your personal favorite piece in the gallery? And can you tell us why and a little more about them?
Oh my gosh, that's like Sophie's Choice. How in the world, how could you do? I threw a bunch of other shots in here. I guess what I love are not just the individual pieces, but, you know, I feel like curatorship is the art of juxtaposition. So we often joke that looking at one piece is art appreciation, whereas looking at two or more is art history. And trying to figure out what fits where and how they'll talk to each other is always a challenge, but it can be amazing. So like if I move through the gallery, whoop, sorry, wrong direction. Having those three works of art on that wall. So the monochrome painting, it is a landscape by an artist named Jui Sheng, who as a young man basically walked the breadth of China. And he, at a certain point, was so exhausted and it was so cold that he was going to lay down and just give up and just die. And he saw a light in the distance, and the people at that little place let him in. And so he managed to express that incredibly dramatic story in kind of the guise of Chinese literati painting. And juxtaposing that, you know, that happened during the Japanese offense in China with Hong Liu's image of the comfort women. That painting is a gut punch. I mean, it's looking into their faces, you see so many different emotions of anger and despair, and then having that next to that large image of Mao Zedong, not because they specifically relate to one another, but Hong comes out of that socialist realist tradition. And so, you know, she took the tools that you see in that poster that she did not make to the right, and does something with them that is completely new and transformed and imparts dignity on people who otherwise wouldn't be considered by history. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different reasons to love works of art, and I love a lot of the different things in the galleries for different reasons. So basically I gave you no answer at all.
Well, I think that's a great answer as well, so it's not a problem. Similar vein, do you know what, if any of the pieces in Gertrude's collections were some of her favorites or some of her of particular interest to her?
Well, I believe that Professor Asim had done work on, I'm sorry, I'm just rushing to get to this robe. So that robe, which perhaps you can see better here on the left, so the robe that has the children, was a robe that I believe she got from her niece. And we have the correspondence between them where her niece wrote about this robe as being her great joy. And, you know, there's something so touching because obviously these are women who knew each other, a collector and somebody who's finding something for her, but something that had great personal resonance. And I mean, it is such a charming piece in so many different ways. I do find myself wondering a lot, did Gertrude Bess Warner ever wear her robes? I don't know that she did. I haven't seen many pictures of her. I certainly haven't seen her wearing any of the specific things that I recognize from the collection. But it sounds like her niece had worn that robe. So, I mean, that becomes an heirloom in a different kind of way.
Definitely. Continuing on about Gertrude, do you know if she donated any other pieces to other museums?
Oh, that's interesting. When she first got to China, she was in Shanghai, and she was not just one of those foreigners who was there just, oh, I like this pretty stuff and I'm going to take it. She actually was kind of interested even at that early stage in cross-cultural context. So she donated a number of her own things to and kind of created a little museum that doesn't exist anymore that was to teach Chinese people about the West. I have no idea what was in it, how successful it was. But I don't know of her giving things to other museums. But I will confer at some point with Professor Asim, because she's done a great deal of research on Gertrude Best Warner, and she might know something that I don't.
Great. We've got another question regarding Gertrude.
Mm-hmm.
Does the museum have any journals or diaries or other written works of Gertrude's? Or are they?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Oh, yes.
They're not physically in the museum anymore. They're in special collections, but there are amazing accounts. Let me see if I have the one. I will read you a very short one because you get a sense of a lot, not just Gertrude Best Warner, but a number of the people who were traveling around Asia at that time. I can see why she became a pacifist. So this is an account of riding on a train, and the train was it was the train for foreigners. It had foreign flags on it, but the engine went out, and so it got replaced with another engine. And it just gives a sense of the chaotic nature of what was going on at the time. Speaking of fighting, let's see. We sent a telegram to the Astor House Hotel in Tianjin from Peking for rooms. They've sent their porter and assistants to get us. At the office of the American Express, we found Mrs. Seaton. We reached the station just as Marshal Wu, with some 600 followers, were leaving by train for the coast, there to take a ship for Tsingtao. His army was left in the lurch. No food, no shelter, no money, and they're a long way from home. With everything to lose and everything to gain, how can they be influenced to fight? And speaking of fighting, one of Marshal Wu's officers did refuse to fight. He was decapitated there in the station just as Mrs. Seaton arrived. It was pandemonium let loose. His head was placed upon a spike for all to gaze upon. There was a body blow to my siding with the Wu. Anyway, you get the sense that it was chaotic at times. A lot of her diary are just the niceties of people that she met and, the exciting experiences that she had. We're focusing on her in China, but I'm a Japanese art historian. I'm also very interested in, she was fascinated with the Shinto religion and spent all of this time documenting rituals and started trying to write a manuscript about Shinto that never ended up being published. Spent time at tea ceremonies and has very funny things to say about, how to learn to eat beautiful little things off of a plate when both of your feet are completely sound asleep. So yeah, there are lots of insights that she had about traveling around and lots of really special experiences. So it's kind of a joy to go through her records. And actually one of the expatriate artists that I had mentioned, Elizabeth Keith and Gertrude Best Warner, they were both Christian Scientists and they were friends. And over time they corresponded. And of course, Mrs. Warner was buying things, including Keith's own works of art from Elizabeth Keith. But they have a correspondence that ranges over 25 years. And much of that is concern about their friends in Asia. And then, during the war in Europe. And it's really quite touching seeing kind of the personal side of her life, in addition to this official side where she was the director of this museum and collecting things and trying to honor her husband in that way.
Oh, that's great to hear. And you'd mentioned that her written works are no longer on display. Is that something that might come back at some future point?
So I'm sorry, that hers, meaning Gertrude Best Warner's written works?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, they exist in special collections, so we don't show them in the museum, but they're kind of historical records, so they're accessible not just to me, but to people who go to visit special collections.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Okay, our next question is, let's see, I heard the museum has hundreds of garments. How do you select and exhibit them? Do you rotate them according to themes? And what are those themes?
We've done a number of different themes. My co-conspirator in all things Chinese, Professor Ina Asim in the history department, is a genius with coming up with themes. And so, as I mentioned, we had done the filial piety, we had done gardens. The last rotation before this was Taoist material, reflections of the cosmic web, and I often joke that with, Asian decorative arts, yeah, you get auspicious themes all the time. You never have an inauspicious textile. Who would spend the time making that? So there are lots of opportunities to put out 100 children, obviously the court robes. We have a very strong collection of court-related materials. So robes that have the 5-clawed dragons of the emperor, 4-clawed dragons of princes, and sort of men's and women's Chinese and Mongol garments, and they're just, I'm sorry, Manchu garments, and they're fascinating. One of the, after the theme, the second thing that you're always concerned about is condition, and you can't put things out over and over again. So, if you put something out 1 year, it's going to have to rest for maybe 4 years before you can put it out again. So it's kind of fun to think about what you can use now and what you can use later. And luckily we have deep pockets for textiles. So it's much easier to come up with a variety of different themes that we could do with textiles than with other categories of art.
Another question, also some related to textiles. I have a friend who has an imperial robe given to an ancestor in the late Qing, circa 1900. They have no information about the gift, other than that the ancestor was a physician to the court. Could they contact you for more information about their robe?
Sure. I mean, I'm willing to look into it. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I end up communicating with Professor Asim, because she's really, she specializes in China, and B, is a textile specialist, amongst other things. So that's the kind of juicy detective work that can be a lot of fun to look into.
Great. For that, the person who asked that question, feel free to send the First Saturday email your information, and we can pass that on to Anne Rose.
Great.
Okay, so in the video tour, it kind of flashed by some of the what looked like to be the older. I'm not sure if they're like vases.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about those.
So do you happen to know if we're talking about the treasure wall or other things in the galleries? I'm just looking for shots that would be helpful.
There were 2 of them on display, not on the treasure wall.
Right. Okay. So let me go back and see if I can get to a view that you can see them. So those are bronzes. So the one that's kind of beneath the calligraphy is the blue and the overglaze enamel yellow base that I had shown. Let's see. Yeah, it's not, I guess I just don't have any great pictures of them.
I think the bronzes would be fine too if you want to speak about those.
Sure. So I'm sorry, let me get back to, I know I have one shot that has, I guess it's a partial view with bronzes. So that's the bronze case that I was talking about, that from the earliest material is on the right, and it goes up through the Qing Dynasty on the left. So it's always interesting to see how later artists are fascinated with the past and kind of using the past in a way to give themselves authority and to show their good taste. So in the treasure wall, there are a number of works of different materials. So, so these Song and Jin bowls are Jizhou, Ding, genware, and suzhou. So the light thing that looks like a cup in a saucer at the back is actually a one piece that is a stand for a cup. You would put a conical bowl inside of that little vessel and just the base of it, and you would use that to lift it to your mouth, because I guess the larger bowl that you're drinking from would be hot. But that is dingware. We associate ding with whitewares, but this is this sort of brown ding that was quite rare. The other bowl that directly in front of it that looks like it has a blotch in it is kind of a charming conceit. This is a jizhou bowl that has the imprint of a leaf. So it was glazed in black, but then they put an actual leaf inside of the bowl so that when it was fired in the kiln, the leaf basically left an impression. So you have to imagine that you're drinking tea, and then once you're done with the tea, you end up with this kind of metaphorical leaf in your bowl. It's just such a beautiful idea.
I think this question is related to these bowls, which is very fortuitous.
Oh, good.
I saw some tea bowls and a stand. How did they reach the gallery? And are there pieces such as scrolls and paintings that show a tea theme?
We do have works of art that show people drinking. When you see the Chinese scholars drinking, if they're having a good time, I think it might not be tea. But I'm trying to think if we have anything that's specifically showing Chinese scholars drinking tea. I think we have more kind of people in the garden thing. Like we have the orchid pavilion paintings where, you know, people are floating the tea bowls down, or floating the bowls down the water. Those are definitely not tea. Those were definitely alcohol. But I'll have to do some thinking to figure out. We must have something that have people drinking tea. But we obviously have these vessels, and I was so pleased when these came in, because Gertrude Bess Warner was interested in getting things that were authentic, but she must not have had access to good Song Dynasty vessels before. And so this was the most wonderful windfall to have these terrific brown and black wares come into the collection. And it's such a nice variety, showing the different kilns and, you know, like the piece at the lower left used paper stencils to get that resist. The one just behind it, it's kind of hard to see, but it has a very schematic plum branch and a bird flying through the air. And the one that's at the lower right is what they call a hare's fur bowl. Not that it had rabbit fur in it, but because of the way that the glaze runs down the interior, it has this beautiful kind of linear pattern to it. And so the poetic name that was given to it at the time was hare's fur. And the same collectors gave us this fabulous suzhou pillow in the shape of a tiger. And so that is a ceramic pillow, which people would use. You know, obviously it's good in the summer when it's very hot outside, so it would keep cool. But people often wonder if, like, that seems like it would be very hard. But I think it was more intended to be under your neck than the back of your head. But it's a fabulous thing.
Wonderful. Let's see, going back to a bit more of a kind of the curatorship part of your role, as and you've mentioned this in your talk a couple times about putting some pieces together, but what works, what guides you in determining what works you put together or next to each other on display?
Well, let's see, if we go through the gallery, I'm trying to get to the things where you can kind of see that, not individual objects, but for example, the case, obviously that's the fancy case that has the non-glare glass. And for safety, for climate reasons, for reasons of lighting, the paintings have to be in there. These are paintings, so this wasn't a thematic show. The theme of the show was, hooray, our gallery is open. Let's celebrate some of the great things from our historic collection and a few recent acquisitions. So there isn't really a relationship between them. I mean, we have two that are kind of landscapes, but we have one that's bird and flower and one that's Buddhist. So this was kind of celebrating variety rather than going for a theme. I think I had shown the images of the, oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. We've talked about those. Put two of the non-court robes, so women's non-court robes together. But again, you know, we tried to choose things that were as different as possible, just kind of showing the you know, the incredible diversity of material in the collection and wanting to have things that don't necessarily match, but they go. Don't really want to put like two white robes out together unless there was some thematic reason for it. The photos ended up being together because their framed works came from the same collection. But, you know, with limited space in a gallery, you end up having funny bedfellows. Who would think contemporary photography next to tomb figurines? But, you know, that's kind of where they fit. So that's where they went. In the center, and I don't really have a great picture of all of them together, we kind of made an ensemble that has the imperial calligraphy above, 5-clawed dragon robes, male and female, on the platform, and then robes on the side, lower down, that were kind of lower ranking robes with the military banners above them. So that was kind of creating a false context, but trying to give an environment in which you could imagine the things being worn. And we did actually do tests before, because oftentimes you'll see robes with their arms out on either side, but some of these robes ended up looking like someone was crucified. And so we decided, even though it was kind of hard to do, to let the arms come down, and had to pad them very carefully so that they would be safe, because they're old and they're fragile and they're made of silk. So you know, even the weight of the material itself can create damage. So there's a lot of artistry on the part of our prep crew, and you know, like I get to give a talk and people are like, oh, you know, if they like it, they give me credit. This takes a village. There are collections managers, conservators, and this huge crew in the prep department that spends all of their time making custom mounts for each of them, making sure that they're safely handled. When the smoke happened from the fires recently, we had to go and wrap all of these. So they all looked like they were very gently wrapped in sort of white material just to protect them from the smoke. So there are a lot of people that are running interference, trying to make sure that everything looks good, stays safe, and doesn't get exposed for too long. So that shows the ones in the center. But as you can see, you end up with funny bedfellows. So yeah, the jade in front might relate to those things, but you know, the Chenlongbing Buddha head has nothing to do with them, but there's limited space in the gallery. But it's kind of catty corner from the Buddhist sculpture, which had to be where it went because of how big it is. So, you know, you kind of make little pockets that have themes within the larger room that, you know, again, it's just celebratory.
Okay, we've got a few more questions.
Okay.
Great. Next one is, you mentioned only one Buddhist painting. Seen in the background on a previous slide.
Yes.
Are there any Zen paintings?
No, unfortunately, not in our Chinese collection. We have, it's, you know, it's interesting what she was collecting. So we don't have any other Chinese Buddhist paintings at all. We don't have any other Chinese Buddhist sculptures, really. I mean, I guess we have a couple of gilt bronze pieces that were given very recently by a former professor, but this is the one and only Buddha, it's certainly the one and only life-size monumental figure that we have. And I'm kind of a snob because this is kind of a hillbilly Buddha. This isn't mainstream, the most elegant style of Buddha. This is kind of provincial. He's a little bit clunky, but he's charming. But I guess it pains me only because I'm an art historian. I don't just care about the culture, but I kind of care about the quality of the art. And it kind of pains me to think that, like, the children of Eugene who grew up here, this is what they think a Buddha looks like. He's not the best, but he's authentic. He's fine. So, I mean, there's a part of me that wants to put the best possible example that I can out. But if this is your only example, this is a different case than our Buddhist painting. The Buddhist painting is spectacular by any measure, whereas if we had other Buddhist sculptures, I'm not sure this guy would make the cut.
Our next question branches out to the other parts of the museum.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes, besides Chinese art, does the UO Museum also include Japanese and other Asian art?
We do. I have the privilege of working with this really exciting collection. So about half of our collection, so about 7,000 works of Asian art, which I guess Japan has the most, then China, and the Korean collection is really quite small, but really high quality. So for East Asia, it's a very fruitful place to study. So I'm trying to think if any of the pictures here. So you're looking from the center of the gallery towards the south, and would be hard for anyone who doesn't already know the building to interpret. But behind the Chenlungbing Sotheby's Buddha, there is a door, and that is the door to the Japanese galleries. So on that side, there are 2 galleries devoted to Japan, and where I'm standing taking this photo behind me in exactly the same orientation are 2 galleries devoted to Korea. And as I mentioned, there are small and medium-sized galleries. So the Chinese gallery, I think, has a larger footprint, but I was astonished when I first came to this museum because I thought I knew where most of the great Asian art collections were in the West, and I got here and I was gobsmacked. I was also floored by the size and scale, as I had mentioned in this. You don't often find Chinese galleries that have 25-foot ceilings. And there are some works of art that really thrive in that, but small, intimate objects, we spend a great deal of time trying to figure out how to make them not seem diminished in such a space. So, there are ways that you can do it. You group them together. I mean, you may have noticed with those contemporary photographs, I didn't put 1 out, I put 4 out. So by making them into a larger area, it kind of makes them feel bigger. The Japanese gallery, I'm very grateful that in both the Korean and Japanese cases, we have small intimate galleries and medium-sized galleries, because some works of art just can't thrive in this type of environment. The grandiosity of Gertrude Bess Warner's collection, a lot of which is kind of Qing Dynasty, Qianlong era imperial art, is probably best suited to this type of space.
Speaking about the space and the environment, our question is, do you do conservation and repair work at your museum? And are there any challenges in maintaining the artworks?
There are lots of challenges. We don't have a full-time conservator paid to do conservation. We actually do have a full-time staff member who is a conservator, but he is our collections manager. And that means that he spends a lot of time doing administrative things and not hands-on conservation. What's great is he's knowledgeable. And so, there are some very simple treatments that he can do. We also have someone in-house who can deal with paper, but again, she is not full-time doing that. She's also matting and framing and helping with textiles. So, you know, like any small institution, people wear many hats, but I'm fortunate that I have amazing colleagues who are incredibly good at what they do and very dedicated. So, you know, we do as much as we can, as fast as we can, but there are a lot of galleries. And, you know, I often feel like I have 5 galleries total, 2 Japanese, 2 Korean, and 1 Chinese gallery. So we joke that I'm a very slow windshield wiper working my way across them, you know, changing first Japan and then change China and then do Korea. Then it's time to go back to Japan again. But that's only half the museum. And then there are all these other special exhibitions and what I kind of jokingly call the non-Asian art that obviously need to happen. So a lot of my rotations happen over the summer so that other things can happen at other times.
Speaking of exhibits, logistical question. What are the dates of the current exhibit? And do you have any new exhibits already scheduled for 2021?
So I'd mentioned that the Hongliu show is opening in May. So that's going to be in our special exhibition space, which is on the opposite side of the museum. But that gift was so large that we're probably going to have to deinstall a couple of other things in this gallery in order to get them all up at the same time. So we have the 2 that I spoke about out, but they're amazing. So some of the Hongliu pieces, I guess the smallest ones are about 1 foot square, but the largest ones is 20 foot wide and 5 feet tall. And the one that we have out, the imperial column, which is unfortunately behind the pagoda in this slide, is obviously, I think that's what, like 10 feet tall. So it's going to be so exciting. It's going to be like jewels in a space because her paintings love light, and it's just going to be so colorful and fantastic. And there's this deep humanity that she imparts to all of the figures in her works of art that I think it's going to be a really powerful show. I haven't yet spoken with my colleagues about what the next Chinese rotation will be in this space. It'll be exciting now that we have the new cases because there are all sorts of different options. And in this slide, you can actually see the light track that is dropped lower down. I've become such a geek, but I cannot tell you how much better it is to be able to light from that level than before. You can just do so much more and the art looks so much happier and better. And I'm also really happy we have LED lights. So, you know, this is the kind of thing that you may not think about when you have LED lights, but museums take a lot of energy because you have a lot of lights, and old lights used to make it really hot. So in addition to running the electricity for all the lights, you're also having to run the electricity to have the air conditioning to cool the place down because you have to maintain a constant temperature and relative humidity. So LED is great in multiple ways.
And I think I speak on behalf of our audience, by the way. We appreciate your geeking out on these things.
Oh, good.
We're going to wrap up with just a couple of other questions. First one is, can you remind us of the museum's website URL?
I believe it is jsma.uoregon.edu.
And then also, let's see. I think there is an upcoming write-up about the museum. Can you
yes.
tell us about that?
So this in the November-December issue of Orientations magazine, I have the pleasure of writing about the Soreng Gallery. So you'll get to see some of the same pictures and hear some of the same discussion. But it was especially gratifying because the editors had gotten in touch saying, you know what, we haven't really done anything with your museum. Would you be willing to do something? And I gave them a bunch of choices, and they said, how about the Soreng Gallery? So I sent them the article, and they wrote back saying, my goodness, we had no idea. This is an amazing place. So, you know, it's nice to hear, because so often, you know, when you're not in a major metropolitan area, and, you know, we struggle sometimes to get grants because grant giving institutions feel like, okay, are we going to give a grant to, you know, a nice, worthy place that's in a relatively small town, or do we give it to some place in Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Chicago? So it was really gratifying to have someone in Hong Kong kind of, you know, impressed with the magnitude of what we have. That's the way I felt, and I feel like I have the best job in the world, that I get to plumb this incredible basement and work with faculty and staff and students in order to learn more about the art. What could be better?
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. We have wrapped up all the questions that have been submitted, and I know we've just got a couple more minutes left over, so I wanted to, Anne Rose, just give you another opportunity to, if you have any final remarks or anything else you'd like to add to our talk before we wrap things up.
Sure. I mean, I very much hope that at some point in the future, we'll be in a position for people to come back to the museum, and I would be delighted to lead a socially distanced in-person tour for anybody who wanted to come.
Excellent. Great. I just want to point out too, if there's any other questions that the audience has, you're welcome to send it to the First Saturday PDX email, and we will forward them on to Anne Rose and you know, share any answers to those questions. Yeah, so again, thank you everyone for joining us. Please be sure, thank you very much for that slide. Please be sure to join us for next month's talk, which is titled The Real Mulan, Tales of a Female Rebel in 18th Century China. The registration will be up on our website hopefully this weekend, and we'll of course send out our usual email announcements with that information as well. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, and our website is on that slide, but just in case it's difficult to read, it's www.firstsaturdaypdx.org.